be much appreciated.
Yeah, that many of the topics still need research, and as typically with vaccines is the case, you start with once you have included into your study, and that is the population, like I described it, the diverse population, then pregnancy is always a difficult question. We, with our platform, have with Ebola done and are doing the studies in pregnancy, so we probably will be able to, at a certain point soon, declare that we will study that. We have done studies up to children up to 1 year, so we know the tolerability, we know the immune, and so far there has been not that much difference in the way people have responded, whether the elderly, adults, or children. We have seen a similar response in the populations. It is true that with COVID-19 you see a higher reactogenicity initially with the vaccines than what we have observed with others. It looks like almost with all the vaccines, and that might, but that's over within 24 hours in most of the patients. So I think we can talk about a very well tolerated vaccine, but we have to study the other populations in order to give the good recommendation. The big question is when to repeat, and that will be part of ongoing studies where we'll have to test whether boost at 6 months, boost at 12 months. We know something from the natural history of the disease where you see that antibodies are waning and that some people, not that many, get reinfected. So more has to be learned about that. And so we'll learn that as we go through the year, but it's definitely a very important subject of research and development now to learn the details of when to boost and other populations safe and effective.
Albert, it would be good to get your view on this question of boosting, but there's some other questions that are coming in from also a lot of different journalists from across the world, Australia, Greece, there's The Guardian in the UK. So Albert, there's a number of questions here. You might want to take a pen and paper. What does Pfizer expect, when does Pfizer expect to have data on the vaccine's ability to thwart transmission, as well as data on durability of its effect? What are the side effects one would expect to see? Would it be safe for people to receive more than one vaccine? And if not, why not? And are there any risks of doubling up on the various vaccines? So a number of questions there, Albert.
I will try, but maybe you remind me the questions because I didn't have a pen and a paper. In terms of the duration of the immune response and how durable the protection is something that we need to find out as with time. So we are going to follow up our subjects in our studies for 2 years, and we'll find out if there is a need for a booster or if the product is more durable than that. But the good news is that with this RNA technology that we are using, you can very easily boost with 1 dose more, and you don't have issues with that at all. So if there is a need, you just need to do another vaccine after a year or 2, but that's all. The second question was, why don't you start telling me one after the other?
Yes, would it be safe for people to receive more than one vaccine? And if not, why not?
It hasn't been tested. I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it is not, but it has not been tested. So I don't think authorities will recommend or will allow it.
And when do you expect to have data to know whether the vaccine doesn't just protect the person, but can also stop transmission?
Yeah. I believe that somewhere in the first quarter we may have this type of data. If also you can sterilize, let's say, the individuals, or if you just protect them from getting the disease, but still they can carry the virus.
And of course, I think you most probably answered it, but I'm just going to put it just in case. Are there any risks of doubling up on the various vaccines? I assume it's too soon to know, but Albert, you're the expert.
You're asking if there are risks if we...
Double up on the various vaccines. So...
Double up means what? To take what?
Well, what I would imagine that means, but perhaps the journalist who put that one in can clarify, is if people take one vaccine at the beginning and then perhaps the booster is from another vaccine. But we could ask for some clarification on that question.
This is what I answered originally in my question, but this is something that has not been tested so far. So I don't think that any authorities will allow it or recommend it right now.
Yeah. And
somebody would like to come in?
Yeah, answering on doubling up, if it is doubling the dose, that doesn't help. Yeah, you at a certain point you have your immune response and you have your boosted your immune response. Having additional vaccines doesn't get you better protected. So, and the safety is not known for that. So it's absolutely not recommended to double up vaccine dosages.
Thank you for that clarification. Let me bring in Severin. There's some questions from the Swiss media here on your perspective on mass testing. In what situations does it make sense and how can it be done well? And how is Roche working to support mass testing in countries? Severin.
Right. So for the time being, actually, demand for tests still is higher than the supply the industry can provide for. So therefore, it's very important that testing is prioritized. And first of all, we have to take care of symptomatic patients, of people at risk, healthcare workers. And only if the volumes allow for broader testing, we should actually go into this direction. So there has been a lot of discussion, for example, should there be mass testing available for the traveling industry, if you take an airplane, for example, or if there's a big event that everybody is tested before going to this event. I can see in the midterm an opportunity to open up the economy by testing much more broadly. But for the time being, the quantities are just simply not available for that.
Thank you. There are some questions here. Dave, let me ask you about treatments and then perhaps Paul on vaccinations. This comes from ARD television in Germany and also Politico. So first of all, Dave, on treatments. NGOs are worried that poorer states will have to wait a long time to get the vaccine. NGOs ask enterprises to share their technology and waive their patent rights. Given the huge public investment in many vaccines developed against the virus, why are your companies not willing to share IP and do technology transfers so that vaccines and treatments can be produced anywhere possible to respond to the needs? So the question about not willing to share IP and do technology transfers, Dave, perhaps on treatments, and then Paul on vaccines.
Well, I would take issue with the nature of the question. I think the questioner is asking whether IP is a barrier to less developed countries accessing, in our case, therapies. The answer is no. We don't even enforce our IP in low and middle income countries. What is a barrier is the production capacities. So if it was thought that making IP more broadly available in these markets could help expand production, we would do it. In the case of Lilly, we have two different therapies, the anti-inflammatory and the antibodies. The anti-inflammatory is widely available everywhere, so there's no gap. And in fact, we're either donating or making product available close to cost in many, many cases there. With the antibodies, the reality is there is no manufacturing capacities available in these low-income markets. So if we donated the IP, there's no way to make the product. It's a circular argument. So what we need to do is harness the developing world or the developed world's capacities and distribute into the developing world. In our case, we've taken an approach there to say we will price according to gross national income per population and have 3 tiers of pricing, developed, middle income, and then the lowest. And in the case of the lowest, it will be either marginal costs or free. That's the method we're using, but all of the capacities for monoclonal antibodies are essentially in wealthy countries. It would make no sense to enable someone to try to make something they have no ability to make. So this is a false narrative that IP is in the way here.
Okay. Paul, do you agree that IP is in the way, is a false narrative, and that your companies are not willing to share IP and do technology transfers in the case of vaccines?
Well, in the case of vaccines at this moment in time, it is, we as companies, we are developing a new technology, new production technology, and scaling up all at the same time. It's not a stable technology. It is, for us at the moment, we are making it a stable technology to be able to produce. We even don't have enough people, or we have to find the people to do our own tech transfers to our other manufacturing facilities. We have a massive mobilization of people around that. And that's the issue at this moment. Building a new manufacturing plant with new specifications will take 3 to 5 years. Mostly it takes 5 years for having this new facilities. So at the moment, it's absolutely not IP nor tech transfer. We are in the middle of innovating new technology to get this solved, which didn't exist before. And therefore, maybe that's time for that in the next 5 to 10 years. But at this moment, we focus on getting the technology stable ourselves and making sure we can supply next year before starting transferring technology and capabilities to others, which is an immense work. Manufacturing building will take 3 to 5 years, and before that, hopefully the pandemic is over.
Albert, you would like to come in on this too?
First of all, I agree fully with Paul and Dave, but also I wanted to build on what Dave just said before. I think if, as I said in the beginning, if there is a lesson here, it is that the IP, which is the blood of the private sector, is what brought a solution to this pandemic, and it is not a barrier right now. I think without that, we wouldn't have a vibrant industry in diagnostics, because it is not, diagnostics didn't appear just that with goodwill. It was because Ross and Abbott and other companies, Quest, were able to do it. Therapeutics didn't appear like that. It was because investments from people that are called investors and shareholders in the hands of an enterprise like Lilly or Regeneron or Gilead were able to provide solutions. And the same applies, that this is the same. We are existing as a private sector, which is based on IP as Pfizer, and the same is J&J, and the same is Moderna. And this is why we're able to provide the solution. So I think, if anything, this pandemic taught us a lesson that reconfirmed the value proposition that the private sector brings to society, rather than the opposite.
Yeah, and this technology was also not invented yesterday. It was already invested over in these technologies for 10 years before they are deployed today in different parts of oncology, or different. It has been a long term, which in the making. Now we build on it, and the first big yield of is happening at the moment of that technology. So it's not 12 months ago that we started to work on this. It's like 10 years ago, investments come now to fruition.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your remarks on that question. Now let me move, Albert, there's another question. This is from Agence France-Presse, also Quartz, coming back to pricing. What factors have gone into the final price of your vaccine candidate?
So the fundamental that went into the pricing was that we need to make sure that we make it very quickly available to everyone. So the principles are very similar with what Dave said. So we are having a tier pricing. It is one price for the developed world based on their GDP. Then we have another price lower for the middle income countries. And then in the low income countries like in Africa, etc., we are giving it on a non-for-profit base. Now, even the price on the developed countries that they can afford to pay, as one can imagine, these products right now are invaluable, particularly in conditions that the supply is lower than demand. We never took advantage of that. So to price right now, only in the US, our pricing is known publicly, because with other countries, they want confidentiality. And it is, let's say, less than $20, 19.5 in the US. It's like a meal. I think this is an average meal. So I think that we've proven that we are not taking the advantage of it. And by the way, with all governments, we're discussing that they should give it free to people. That's why we offer those low prices, so that to make sure that the citizens will take it for free, as it's happening in the US, for example.
Thank you very much for that. And indeed, Paul, perhaps, are you negotiating lower prices, Paul, for the vaccine for COVAX? And if you'd like to unmute yourself.
At the moment, COVAX is a combination of high, middle, and low-income countries, and therefore there's a different approach to the different tiers in that, as my colleagues have been saying. Mm-hmm.
Thank you on that one. Let me then move to South Africa. A question again for you, Paul. Johnson & Johnson recently announced a deal to produce its vaccine in South Africa with Aspen Pharmaceuticals. Will Aspen be fill and finishing the vaccine in South Africa, or will there be any primary or secondary manufacturing in South Africa?
Well, the Aspen has fill and finish, and we have a collaboration on the fill and finish. As I was saying earlier, anything else earlier on producing vaccine substance itself will take 3 to 5 years. So we had to access, and everyone had to access, existing facilities to be able to deliver next year. And that's what we do. We contract fill and finish in several facilities all over the world.
So there's a few fill and finish questions coming in here, not just for vaccines, but also for diagnostics as well. Severin, yeah, what are your plans for, apologies, that's my mistake for misreading a question that's come in, but Severin, I'm still going to ask you, this is one from Politico, and then perhaps Dave. For those companies developing monoclonal antibodies for COVID-19, can you please tell us your plans for filing and launching markets outside of the US? So Severin and then Dave, getting regulatory approval outside the US.
Right. So I can speak for the antibody cocktail, which originates from Regeneron and where we have a worldwide agreement to produce and commercialize this cocktail. So it has been approved under the emergency status in the United States. And we are working together with authorities in the rest of the world to make the medicine available as soon as possible. However, I should say the key constraint at this stage is manufacturing capacities. It was pointed out already several times. For monoclonal antibodies, worldwide capacities are very limited. So to put it into perspective, for our antibody cocktail, we aim for a production next year of 2 million doses. 2 million doses. So this is a relatively small quantity of doses we can provide. Now, if we get those doses to the right patients, to the high-risk patients, they could play a major role in reducing mortality. But you can immediately see from the number, 2 million for the world, right? That supply is the number one issue here, and that's what we are focusing at the moment.
Thank you. Dave, the same question to you.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just so the reporters have it, we have submitted for review to a number of ex-US countries. The Canadians have accepted it, so it's approved under contingent use for Canada. We're in conversations with dozens of other countries, both developed and developing, for both the mono and combo therapy. But I agree with Severin's comment that we're talking about single-digit millions of doses next year in any case. And the key will be to collaborate with health authorities to allocate the supply within country to those most needy. And our data identifies people over 65 and those with pre-existing health conditions, immune suppression, et cetera, that can really benefit. And, we've shipped 250,000 doses in the US, and thousands of people have been treated. Anecdotally, it's very successful. So I think this is a key tool, but it's not by itself going to fix the pandemic crisis. Of course, we need as many people vaccinated as possible, and we need other types of therapies as well.
Well, there are lots of journalist questions coming in, so let me take a few more here. Severin, this is an interesting one from the Daily Mail in the UK. When do you anticipate large UK companies will begin COVID testing their staff regularly?
This refers to a question we covered earlier in terms of mass testing. And again, the limitations here are supply. There is, however, the prospect that supply will really significantly increase over the coming months, and that's related to antigen tests. So you have on the one hand so-called PCR tests. That's very difficult to ramp up. But rapid antigen tests and antigen tests also in a more centralized setting can be produced at much larger scale. And so I think that will open up the door for a broader coverage of the population. And then, of course, in particular in critical sectors, the healthcare sector, that can also open up for more regular testing for these people concerned.
Thank you. Albert, there's a question from Reuters here. The FDA today released documents that raised no new issues about the safety and efficacy of your vaccine candidate. Given this outcome, do you have a new projected date for US approval? Could we see it this week, says Reuters?
This is not for me neither to decide nor to predict. I think that I expect a very intense meeting with the advisory committee. These are experts. They will ask a lot of questions. We have answers, we believe, to every question that they will ask. And I think they will vote yes, given the strength of the data. And then it's up to FDA to conclude the process and give us the license. They need to take as much time as they need to feel comfortable.
Yes,
this is very important for the trust of the vaccine from the people.
Yeah, in the hands of the regulators there. Paul, there's a question here from a Swedish journalist. The UK is planning human challenge trials in January. Will your company participate in such trials?
We are currently not planned to do that. And I think we are waiting for the validation of a challenge model and an acceptance ethically that will be needed. I think it might be very useful in the future, but at the moment, the challenge model has always been the challenge that if people get infected, do they get sick? And if it is a risk for the volunteers, and therefore proving that there is good therapy, as well as the challenge model validated, and then we'll maybe participate if still needed. We are doing a phase 3 study, so we'll prove at the moment in the real world the efficacy.
Yeah, certainly. Thomas, a question from Politico. On the proposal from South Africa and India on waiving aspects of TRIPS to ensure access to coronavirus medical products, is it not reasonable for countries to want to do everything possible to ensure that they have access to a vaccine, especially given the expected reduced in comparison to the massive needs? Now, I'm not sure whether that's a typo there on that question, so apologies, Politico US, but the main question is your view on South Africa and India on waiving aspects of TRIPS to ensure access to coronavirus medical products.
I think I got the gist of the question. And basically, as we already heard, IP, the current strong innovation business model, has been an enabler. We would have had no chance to move as quickly developing treatments or vaccines without the IP system we have. I fully understand, and I think that's legitimate, that people want to have access to the treatments or the vaccines. And we understand that the main constraint is supply. And that's why it is truly important. And I think it was very heartening to hear from all the 4 panelists how they are concerned that their treatments and vaccines or even tests reach the people who most need them. The healthcare workers, the vulnerable, that's why we are involved in the COVAX facility. But when you look at the political discussion in WTO on TRIPS, even if the patents were waived, not a single more vaccine would reach the people during the pandemic. Therefore, the practical impact, and we heard it from Paul in terms of the fill and finish collaboration with Aspen, we heard it from Dave and several in terms of the monoclonal antibodies. And you look at the complexity of the mRNA technology, not a single more vaccine would be available, but it would send a really bad signal for the future, because we already mentioned the importance of preparedness for future pandemics. And if the signal is, if we have a new pandemic, we'll take away your patents, which have enabled us to react so strongly, I do not think that this would be the right signal.
There's also a question, Albert. This is from ITN News. This is the UK independent news channel. Why has the FDA discovered this and the MHRA missed it? Now, I'm not sure what they're talking to me about. Is that a sign of the UK regulator rushed approval? And how much does this potentially change distribution? I don't know whether that question means anything to you. I'm sorry. I'm going to try and see whether I can get some clarification on that question. And in the meantime, Albert, what I'm going to go to is this one, which comes from Australia and India. Pfizer and BioNTech's vaccine needs to be stored at around -70 degrees C. Is the logistics of maintaining this temperature through supply chains a significant hurdle to overcome before a widespread rollout of the vaccine can be implemented? And are you working on versions of your vaccine that can be stored in less extreme temperatures in countries like India, for example?
Clearly, to have something that requires -70, which is not something usual, it is an additional challenge. But in any case, I want to say that the distribution of a vaccine so massively in so many countries by itself, it is a challenge. I feel very comfortable about our ability to distribute the product at -70 right now. This is based on all the ingenuity of our mechanics that developed solutions to do that. We have special boxes that you store the vaccine there without needing refrigeration. You can transport it in a normal car, for example, and we have GPS and thermometers inside those boxes. So at any point of time, we know where each box is and what was the temperature over there. And right now we started already in the UK and things are going very well. And we did tests in the US and we will start soon, I hope. And I think everybody will see pretty soon that this is not a challenge, at least in countries that there is basic infrastructure, like a road, for example, or a place to store things. The answer to the second question is yes. We are working also on a new formulation that will be able to avoid the -70 and can be stored in simple refrigeration.
Thank you very much for that. Paul, a question from Switzerland here. Why are vaccine contracts with governments confidential, and when will they become public in Europe?
Why they're confidential, I have no clear answer for that. It's the choice of the two parties to keep contracts confidential, as many discussions are ongoing in the world, and significant specificity on delivery, etc., could bring a lot of noise through the world, and that's not needed in this complicated times where we have already to deal with so much. That is.
Thank you very much. I've now got clarification on that question from ITN News, Albert. which is, has the UK regulator rushed approval? And does where the vaccine is approved potentially change distribution? And should the UK change its protocol to 1 dose now? But yes, the main question is about the speed of that approval by the MHRA, the UK regulators.
Although it's not appropriate for me to comment on regulators, but I would say that the MHRA is a world-renowned agency, that it is one of the best in the world and one that has the best expertise in the world. FDA is the same. But so that's where I will stop. I have full confidence, and I think the British people have full confidence. And by the way, I think many other countries, they have full confidence on the abilities of the UK regulator.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, there's a question here from Bloomberg, because of course, as you say, you're carrying on your trials. Have you seen volunteers drop out in light of the Pfizer news, i.e. the Pfizer vaccine, as we know, is being given as we speak, at least in the UK. But with your vaccine, have you lost volunteers, and what issues do you see with recruiting a range of ages if lots of older people get vaccinated over the next few months?
Well, that's a question we are working on to answer for the people in the studies, that if they get access to a certain vaccine in a certain region in their category, for whether they're elderly or healthcare worker, we find a way to inform them and do everything necessary that they can participate in that study or in that rollout. But it's very important that people who are in clinical studies consult with their study center before they drop out, because it might not be needed to drop out for getting access to a vaccine. And so that's where people have to get the guidance. And I would recommend stay in the study. When you are in a study, and if you get access to another vaccine, first consult with the study center to make sure that we continue to learn, but at the same time, you're not at disadvantage to get access to a vaccine if you are in a placebo.
Paul, this is obviously with your hat on as Chief Scientific Officer. In Russia and Italy, some of the journalists are asking you, there's been an article in Nature, and according to Nature, there is a new mutation of COVID-19 in Denmark and the Netherlands, which might be immune to the new vaccine. Do you think that current vaccines will still be efficient, or do we need a herd immunity now?
I don't have an answer on the specific mutation people talk about, but scientists, the first mutations which appeared in the course of the year were tested, and the vaccines were still active on that. We need more specifics to yes or no answer on that question of the scientists now. I have no detailed information.
A question here from the Business Insider, Albert. Does the data suggest a level of protection from Pfizer's vaccine after getting just 1 dose? If true, what are the implications of that? And when could Pfizer have confirmatory data about the potential effect/benefit from a single dose?
Yes, the truth is that what we saw, it is already from the 12th day, which is just 12 days after the first, we already start having protection. But clearly the protection is not full. So this 2-dose vaccine, so people need to take 2 doses to be able to feel confident that they're protected at 95%. They have 95% chances of being protected. At dose 1, it's around 50%, something like that.
And there's another question here, Albert.
But however, I want to say that that's important, though, from epidemiology point of view, because when you start already having with the first dose your population already start having some type of immunity, that helps. But again, I say it's a very big mistake if anyone tries to do it with only 1 dose. When with 2, you almost double the protection.
Okay. There we are. Yes, a question from the Swiss media, Albert. How challenging has it been to ramp up the Pfizer vaccine production? Have you suffered any ingredient shortages, and how about equipment shortages?
Yeah. When you are embarking in such a monumental project, every day we had zillion of challenges, believe me, and every day we had successes that unfortunately couldn't last more than 1 hour on the average, because then some bad news would come to spoil the satisfaction and the joy. This is extremely difficult to do what we are doing right now. So there were shortages in some materials, there were shortages in some equipment, and we have resolved it all. So that's why we started the manufacturing process, and that's why we already have produced millions, and we will produce 50 by the end of the month, and then 1.3 by the end of the year. And now, if there was available more machinery, more technology, more raw materials, we wouldn't make 1.3 billion next year. We would make 2, 3, because we can make 4 and still sell it all or distribute it all. But right now we are exhausting the capacity of us and of our suppliers after looking all over the world to see if someone knows what we are doing. And unfortunately, it's not that simple.
And perhaps one final question for Severin. Has MABS manufacturing issues been a reason for not filing outside of the US? Is there enough supply for markets beyond the US, Severin?
To what is, may I just ask, to what is the question related to?
Because that's a very good question. This is the challenge, of course, when you're taking questions writing, but they're wanting to know, I think, is there enough supply outside the US of diagnostics? And I'm just getting a note here that this is also a question for Dave. So,
this is with the monoclonal antibodies, Severin.
Right. Okay. Yeah, we have manufacturing capacities in the US, but also important manufacturing capacities outside of the US. And, you know, we are leveraging any capacity we can find within our own network and also with partners to maximize output. We you know, I can just reiterate what Albert and others, Dave, etc., have already said. We are leveraging anything we can get within our own network and outside of our own network, and this is in the US and in a number of other countries. As far as our antibody cocktail is concerned, the distribution in the US is taking care of Regeneron, and we take care of the distribution outside of the US.
And Dave,
it's clear, we've submitted in a number of countries, not limited by this question. We think the appropriate thing is to make it available as broadly as we can, and then let governments allocate within country to the highest risk individuals. That's the best way to manage the limited capacities. But like Severin had said, we have 5 different API facilities, 5 different fill finish facilities on every continent working on this. The reality is there's not enough monoclonal antibody production on the planet to serve the needs of COVID-19 with these therapies. We're using what was already built for other things and repurposing it here. Delivery time for a new facility for antibodies is 3 or 4 years typically. So we don't have the choice to build a new site for this purpose. We're just using what we have. And I think doing a pretty good job stitching that together, given all the constraints.
Well, thank you, the media, for your many, many questions that have come flooding in, and gentlemen, for giving us an update on what you're doing and what you are planning to do next year, which is obviously going to be a very important year. Let me hand over now to Thomas Kueni for his closing remarks to this media briefing.
Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you for all of you who tuned in. When you look back to March, when we started these media briefings first time, I think at that time we all felt a daunting responsibility upon us. We believed in the power of science, and I think Albert said it at the beginning, really what we have seen here, science will win. We have seen tremendous progress in terms of treatments, in terms of vaccines. I think all of us have seen our best, highest expectations in terms of the efficacy of these early vaccines exceeded. I think we also see the importance and the power of partnership. We have heard from Paul, for example, but from all the others too. It has been amazing how regulators responded overnight very often. The rolling submissions, which are ongoing, the only reason why one can really confidently say no corners have been cut, because the safety of patients overrules any other consideration, such as politics or speed. I think it's also really heartening to see, and Dave said it at the beginning, how proud he is about this industry as being IFPMA president for the last 2 years. I think it has really been a proud moment in terms of the industry delivering on what society would hope industry would do, not just in terms of the science, the treatments, the vaccines, but also doing so in a socially responsible manner. You have heard from all companies that they are deeply conscious about the need to provide their vaccines and treatments or tests in a socially responsible way, make them available and affordable, really try everything to scale up, apply differential pricing, or in some cases donations, or in some cases where it's possible, technology transfer. I think we have seen all of that in partnership with governments, with international organizations such as WHO, CEPI, Gavi, and others, philanthropic organizations, academics. It is amazing. I think at the end also we really need to expect bumps ahead of the road. As Albert said, there's no day without a nasty surprise, which we will have to overcome. And it's really kudos to all the engineers, scientists, and everybody working in this, and great respect to the healthcare workers on the front line who do deserve to get those vaccines early on. I think it's also important to say that we have seen light at the end of the tunnel, but for the next few months, life will remain difficult in literally all our countries, and there's no way avoiding the social distancing rule, even now over the festive seasons. Really, we really need to respect the social distancing rule. We need to respect the hand washing, and we need to realize that mask wearing does protect not just us, but others. Otherwise, those next 3 to 6 months ahead will be even tougher. There have already been too many lives lost to COVID-19. I think we from the industry are in there to bring the pandemic to an end. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, Thomas, for your closing remarks. Thanks to the speakers who have joined us from all over the world, and of course to the journalists for your very insightful questions. The recording of this briefing can be found on the IFPMA website at www.ifpma.org. In the meantime, please stay safe. Thank you for joining us.